She had heard rumors of a hidden honey grove, whispered among locals. But as she stepped closer, she saw the mother bear and her cubs, feeding undisturbed. One wrong move could change everything. The forest had a rhythm she had never noticed before. Every rustle, every snapping twig seemed amplified, as if the woods themselves were whispering secrets. Sarah had come in search of the legendary honey grove, a place the locals spoke of in hushed tones. They said only the bears truly knew its location, and humans who stumbled upon it rarely returned the same. Her heart raced as she followed the faint smell of wildflowers mixed with something richer, something sweet that tugged at her curiosity. She kept her distance, careful not to make a sound, yet the more she tried to be silent, the more aware she became of every fluttering leaf, every distant bird call. Suddenly, a flash of brown and gold caught her eye. A mother bear and her cubs were foraging, oblivious to her presence. Sarah froze, unsure whether to retreat or risk moving closer. She could feel her pulse echoing in her ears, a drumbeat that matched the tension in the air. This was it. She had found the edge of the grove. But then, as if sensing a presence, one cub turned, sniffing the air. Sarah held her breath, praying her movements hadn't betrayed her. The cub's tiny, innocent eyes met hers for a moment, a connection that made her heart ache with both fear and awe. She took one cautious step forward, and heard a deep, rumbling growl that wasn't far behind her. Her foot shifted on a dry branch, snapping it sharply under her weight. The cubs froze, ears perked, and the mother bear lifted her head, nostrils flaring. Sarah's heart thumped violently. She had crossed an invisible line. The mother bear stood tall, towering and majestic, muscles coiled like springs. But rather than charging, she only watched. Sarah realized in that moment that the bears were not acting out of aggression. They were protectors, guardians of a secret they had cultivated over seasons. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, yet a strange calm began to wash over her. She realized the grove wasn't just a place, it was a world, a sanctuary carefully balanced by the bear's watchful presence. She inched backward, careful to avoid sudden movements, yet something inside told her to stay. It was then she noticed the richness of the grove. Honey dripping from every tree, golden light bouncing off amber combs tucked in bark crevices, bees buzzing lazily around the sweet bounty. The bears worked in harmony with nature, taking only what they needed, leaving the rest untouched. Sarah felt an overwhelming mix of awe and guilt. How many humans had trespassed carelessly, leaving chaos in their wake? Here was a lesson in patience, respect, and understanding. She whispered softly to herself, "I need to learn their ways." A sudden rustle in the bushes behind her hinted that she wasn't alone, and not all creatures in the grove were friendly. Visual prompt. Close up on Sarah's feet near the bears, branch snapping. Mother bear alert, cubs looking toward her. Background of dripping honey, bees circling, sunlight filtering through canopy. Focus on tension and connection. Sarah remained still, breathing shallowly, letting the bears settle back into their routine. She began to notice subtle cues. The mother bear's posture changed when a branch snapped, the cubs mirrored her movements, and even the smallest bee flight seemed purposeful. Every action was deliberate. Hours passed as Sarah watched, learning without interfering. She realized she could not just observe, she needed to listen to understand the language of the forest. One wrong sound, one sudden move, and everything could collapse. She saw how the mother taught the cubs where to forage, how to sniff for hidden honey, how to navigate the grove safely. Each gesture was precise, protective, and patient. Sarah felt like an intruder at first, then a witness to a living story unfolding in real time. Her camera captured moments she knew would never leave her memory: the cub nudging its mother, the golden honey reflecting in the sunlight, the soft rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze passed. It was as though the grove itself was alive, whispering lessons to anyone who had the humility to watch. A shadow moved near the edge of the grove. A stranger hiker had unknowingly wandered into the sanctuary. The soft rustling of leaves behind her broke the careful rhythm Sarah had maintained all morning. She turned slowly, heart hammering, to see a man emerging from the shadowed tree line. He carried a backpack and a walking stick, oblivious to the grove's hidden sanctity. Every instinct screamed for her to warn him, yet the mother bear had already noticed. The cubs froze mid-step, ears twitching. The mother stood taller, muscles taut and eyes sharp as knives. She sniffed the air, tail brushing the sun-dappled ground, and let out a low growl, not aggressive but a clear warning. Sarah froze, realizing that the bear was silently communicating both to her and to the stranger. The forest had its own rules, and here intruders were not tolerated lightly. The man stepped closer, whistling softly, perhaps trying to charm the forest or perhaps unaware of the tension. Sarah's breath caught. Every step he took toward the grove felt like a potential disaster. The mother bear shifted, blocking the cubs from view, her body a living barricade between the vulnerable and the careless. Sarah's mind raced. Should she step out and call to the man? Could she risk revealing the grove and the bear's hidden sanctuary? She wanted to protect them, to shield their delicate balance from human interference, yet the instinct to save a life, even her own, pressed heavily on her. She whispered to herself, "Don't move, don't startle them." The man bent slightly, distracted by something on the ground, a fallen branch, perhaps a small animal scurrying nearby. The mother bear's growl deepened, resonating like the hum of the forest itself, vibrating through Sarah's chest. It was a warning, a lesson: respect the boundaries or face consequences. For a tense moment, time seemed suspended. The cubs crouched behind their mother, eyes wide and reflective, mirroring Sarah's own fear. She felt the gravity of the moment. This was not just a grove, not just honey, it was a classroom, a lesson in the unspoken language of survival, trust, and respect. Then, as if reading the man's inattention, the mother bear relaxed slightly but never let her guard down. She turned back to the honey trees, leading her cubs carefully to safer feeding spots, still aware of the intruder. Sarah realized that the bears had mastered patience as a weapon and protection. The man finally looked up and noticed her, their eyes meeting across the grove. Panic and recognition flashed across his face, and he instinctively froze. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost tangible. Any sudden move from either human or bear could ignite chaos. She took a slow, deliberate step toward him, raising a hand in a gesture of caution. It's not safe to come closer," she whispered, voice trembling but controlled. The man nodded, too shocked to speak, and slowly began retreating, casting one last glance at the grove as if he had glimpsed a hidden world. The mother bear observed the retreat quietly, cubs following closely, and only then did she return fully to feeding. Sarah exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She realized she had just witnessed a delicate ballet of boundaries and trust. As she returned her gaze to the grove, she noticed a glint of gold in the underbrush, something much older and stranger than the honey, hidden in plain sight. The grove fell into a fragile calm once the man had disappeared back into the forest. Sarah moved carefully, each footstep measured, mindful of the dry leaves that could betray her presence. The mother bear continued to feed her cubs, dipping her massive paws into the honey-laden crevices of the ancient trees. Their soft slurping noises echoed in the clearing, a surprisingly delicate sound for such enormous creatures. Sarah couldn't shake the image of the man, the way his presence had disrupted the harmony of the grove. It was as though he had reminded her that humans often acted as intruders, unthinking and unaware of the consequences. Her mind drifted to the cubs, whose curiosity mirrored that of any human child, reckless, yet innocent. She realized that just like the humans, the bears were learning lessons about trust, boundaries, and the dangers of their surroundings. As she stepped closer to the grove, she noticed something unusual beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient tree, a small, weathered box half buried in moss and leaves. It seemed out of place amidst the natural order, a remnant of someone else's passage through the forest. She knelt down slowly, brushing the dirt and debris aside, her fingers trembling with a mix of anticipation and fear. The box was old but sturdy, and its metal clasp was encrusted with rust. The mother bear lifted her head at the sound of her movements, ears twitching, eyes sharp and calculating. She did not advance toward Sarah, but the growl in her throat was a warning, a reminder that this was her domain. Sarah froze, half expecting the bear to charge, but instead, the cubs nuzzled against their mother, oblivious to the discovery at their feet. Sarah opened the box with a careful twist of the rusty latch. Inside lay an assortment of old coins, tiny trinkets, and a folded piece of parchment. Her breath caught as she carefully unfolded it, revealing a faded map, its ink smudged but still legible. The map showed not just the grove she stood in, but a network of secret clearings and hidden streams winding through the forest, places where honey trees grew in abundance, but few humans ever ventured. Her eyes widened. This was not merely a grove, it was part of a hidden kingdom, preserved and protected by generations of creatures, human and bear alike. She understood then why the mother bear had been so protective, so vigilant. This forest had its secrets, and only those who respected its rules could witness them. Sarah glanced back at the bears. The mother's gaze met hers, steady and almost intelligent, as if judging whether Sarah understood the weight of what she held. The cubs played at her feet, ignorant of the responsibility their mother carried. Sarah felt a surge of respect not just for the bear's strength, but for her wisdom and guardianship. Suddenly, a rustle came from the far edge of the grove. Sarah froze, heart thudding. The mother bear stiffened, growl deepening in her throat. She moved with deliberate speed, guiding her cubs behind a protective wall of fur and muscle. Sarah followed cautiously, aware that the forest had more than one watcher, and that her intrusion, however unintentional, had not gone unnoticed. From the shadows a second figure emerged, smaller, more cautious, carrying a camera tripod. It was a wildlife photographer, likely drawn by rumors of the grove's honey trees. Unlike the first man, this one moved with care, almost reverence. He paused at the edge of the clearing, sensing the tension but unaware of the hidden treasures just beyond his sight. The mother bear's eyes locked on the newcomer, muscles coiling, and Sarah realized with a jolt that she might have to intervene before the delicate balance of the grove shattered completely. She didn't tell anyone about the grove. Not her husband, not her son who visited once a month, not even her old friend Margaret who stopped by to share gossip and wildflower tea. There was something sacred about that space, something the world outside wouldn't understand. It wasn't a place to boast about or photograph. It was a secret written in the earth, guarded by paws, wings, and whispers. Each day, the woman would walk to the grove before dawn, carrying her basket of offerings. Sometimes apples, sometimes a few slices of bread spread with honey. The air there always felt different, heavier yet pure, filled with a kind of watchful calm. She noticed that the grove changed with the seasons but never lost its essence. In winter, the snow made every branch glisten like sugar. In summer, sunlight dripped through the leaves like molten gold. And always, there was honey. She'd begun to see it everywhere. Honey on the stones, on the bark of trees, even on the surface of the small pond that sat in the middle of the clearing. It was as if the grove itself was leaking sweetness. Sometimes she wondered if the earth was dreaming, and honey was its way of smiling. The bears knew she was keeping their secret. They seemed to trust her more with each passing visit. The mother bear no longer grunted when she came close. The cubs, growing plump and curious, would tumble near her feet, sniffing her basket and pawing her shawl. She would laugh softly, kneeling to offer a handful of berries or to fix the edge of a broken hive, her hands sticky and glowing in the morning light. One morning, as she sat there humming a lullaby from her childhood, she felt a soft nudge at her back. She turned, startled, and found the mother bear standing behind her, silent and still. In her jaws, the bear held something, a piece of tree bark shaped like a heart, thick with golden honey. Slowly, she dropped it at the woman's feet and stepped back, her deep brown eyes glimmering with something more than instinct. It wasn't just food. It was an offering. A sign of trust, of kinship, of something wordless but real. The woman felt tears blur her eyes. She reached out, her hand trembling, and pressed it to the bear's muzzle. For a second, the forest stopped breathing. Then, with a low rumble, the bear turned and walked away, disappearing into the green shadows, leaving behind the honey heart, glistening in the dappled light. From that day she understood, the grove wasn't just a refuge for bears. It was a covenant, between her and the wild, between trust and silence. A promise that some secrets aren't meant to be spoken, only lived. It happened without warning, the kind of storm that seemed to roll out of nowhere, roaring across the valley like an angry memory. The sky, once golden with the late autumn light, turned the color of wet ash. The woman had barely finished gathering her firewood when the first thunder cracked, echoing so loudly it rattled the jars on her kitchen shelf. By nightfall the rain came in sheets. The forest that usually hummed with quiet life went eerily still. Only the wind howled, bending the trees like blades of grass. She lit a lantern, pressed it near the window and whispered a prayer, not for herself but for the grove. She could almost feel it calling to her through the storm, the way a heartbeat might echo faintly from a distance. Then came the sound, faint at first, then distinct. A scratching at her door. Pause. Another scratch. Her heart thudded. She grabbed the lantern, stepped forward, and hesitated. The scratching turned to a heavy thump. Slowly she unlatched the door and gasped. There they were. The cubs. Soaked, shivering, their fur matted with mud and rain. Behind them loomed the mother bear, drenched to the bone, her massive chest rising and falling with labored breaths. For a moment the woman froze, but then instinct took over. She opened the door wider and stepped aside. The bears entered without hesitation, dripping water across her wooden floor. The smell of wet fur and forest earth filled the room. The cubs huddled near the hearth, trembling, while the mother stood watch near the window, her eyes following every flash of lightning outside. The woman fed the fire, tossed in extra logs and spread blankets near the cubs. She spoke softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It's all right now, you're safe here." Hours passed. The wind screamed, branches snapped, and rain battered the roof like falling stones. But inside, a strange peace took root. The mother bear eventually lay down near the door as if guarding it. The cubs, now warm and sleepy, nestled close to the hearth, their tiny paws twitching in dreams. The woman sat nearby, her lantern casting honey-colored light across their faces. She thought about how nature had reversed their roles, how the creatures she once feared were now her guests, her companions in the storm. Near dawn, the rain finally slowed. Mist began to creep through the forest like a veil. The woman looked around her small cabin, the broken chair, the soaked rugs, the open door, and smiled. It didn't matter. That night had rewritten something deep in her. She had let the wild inside, and it hadn't destroyed her. It had completed her. As the sun rose, faint and pink through the fog, the mother bear stood, shook herself dry, and looked at the woman one last time. No sound. No growl. Just a look, one that carried gratitude, respect, and a kind of farewell. Then, with the cubs in tow, she disappeared into the forest mist. The woman stepped outside, barefoot on the wet grass. The forest glistened as if reborn. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint hum of bees awakening, the grove's heart still beating. And she knew deep down that the bears would remember. They always did. The storm had passed, but the forest felt different now, quieter yet heavier as though holding its breath. The woman ventured out that morning to check the grove. Fallen branches littered the path, and the moss was soaked, gleaming like green glass. She followed the familiar trail to the hollow, where the bees had rebuilt their home among the flowering trees. The air smelled rich and alive again, and she smiled softly, whispering, "You made it through." But her peace didn't last. By mid-afternoon, she noticed smoke rising from beyond the ridge, not from the storm's aftermath but from campfires. The smell was foreign, sharp with burnt wood and something metallic. When she climbed higher and peered through the trees, she saw them. 3 men in camouflage, rifles slung across their backs, trudging down the muddy slope. Hunters. Her stomach twisted. This was the first time she'd seen people this deep into the valley in months. Their voices carried through the damp air, laughter, careless and loud. And then one of them pointed toward the grove. "They'll be down there," she heard him say. "Tracks everywhere after the storm. Let's flush 'em out." The woman's breath caught. She looked toward the grove, toward where the bears might have taken shelter. Her mind raced. If the hunters found the honey grove, they'd find the bears. And after the night they'd shared, she couldn't let that happen. She hurried back down the trail, her boots sinking into the wet soil. Every step was a battle between fear and resolve. The forest seemed to pulse around her. The rustle of branches, the trickle of runoff water, the distant rumble of thunder still lingering beyond the mountains. When she reached the grove's edge, she saw the faint outline of paw prints in the mud. The bears had been there recently. She crouched, tracing the tracks with trembling fingers. "You have to stay hidden," she whispered into the air, as if the wind itself could carry her warning. Moments later, she heard footsteps behind her, not bare but boots. She ducked behind a fallen log as the hunters appeared. They scanned the area, rifles ready, eyes alert. One of them stepped dangerously close to the hive-lined trees. The woman's pulse pounded in her ears. Then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, came a sound. A low, deliberate growl. The men froze. One of them raised his gun. What was that? Before they could react, the mother bear emerged from the shadows. Her fur was damp, her eyes fixed and unyielding. She didn't charge, not yet, but her presence filled the clearing with raw power. The cubs stayed behind her, barely visible. The hunters hesitated. One whispered, "Easy now." The woman wanted to shout, to tell them to back away, but she stayed silent. The forest had its own way of enforcing respect. The bear took one heavy step forward, then another. Her growl deepened, not a sound of rage but of warning. The message was clear: this grove is not yours. The men finally began to retreat, muttering under their breath, keeping their guns lowered but ready. Once they were gone, the bear turned her head slightly toward where the woman hid. Their eyes met, and for a moment, it was as if the wild itself acknowledged her. When the hunters' voices faded into the distance, the woman exhaled, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. She rose slowly, stepping into the open, whispering, "Thank you." The bear blinked, then melted back into the forest shadows, the cubs following like small ghosts between the trees. The grove was safe again, at least for now. But the woman knew this would not be the last time humans came looking. and next time the balance might not hold. She looked up at the sky. The storm clouds were breaking apart, letting through shards of light. Bees buzzed timidly between the flowers, rebuilding as though nothing had happened. Yet beneath that fragile calm, something deeper stirred, a quiet war between greed and guardianship. And she knew where she stood. That night, the valley was eerily quiet. Even the river, usually roaring from the mountains, seemed to hush itself as if the forest had agreed to a fragile truce. The woman sat by her cabin window, watching the last streaks of twilight fade behind the ridges. Every sound made her tense, the snap of a twig, the cry of a night bird. She couldn't shake the image of the hunters, their eyes scanning the woods, their laughter echoing. She knew they'd be back. When dawn came, she packed a small canvas bag with food, a flashlight, and her old radio. Her plan wasn't clear, only her purpose was. She had to warn the bears, to somehow make them understand that danger was coming again. The idea sounded impossible, but in her heart she knew, the bears had listened before. As she trekked back toward the honey grove, the forest felt alive with signals, bird calls, distant snapping branches, the scent of damp earth. She found fresh tracks along the creek. The cubs' paw prints were smaller now, closer together, following their mother's larger, confident stride. The grove was glowing under morning light when she arrived. The bees had returned, their hum blending into the whisper of the wind. She stood in the open, scanning the trees, her voice trembling but steady. "I know you can hear me," she said softly. "You need to move, far from here. They'll come back with more men, more guns. You can't fight that." No answer came. Only the sound of the bees and the leaves stirring above. She turned, half believing she was foolish to try, and then from behind the rocks came a shape. The mother bear stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her breath visible in the cool air. Her fur was darker now, still slick from last night's rain. The woman froze. The bear stopped a few feet away. They stood in silence, the kind that felt like language. The bear's gaze held hers, and in that stillness, it was as if she understood. "I don't want to lose you," the woman whispered. "Not to them." The bear snorted softly, lowering her head toward the cubs that peeked from behind her legs. Then she did something unexpected. She nudged a fallen branch aside, revealing a half-covered mound of earth. Beneath it shimmered a patch of golden comb, glistening in sunlight. A gift. Tears filled the woman's eyes. "You're thanking me?" The bear blinked slowly, a gesture of calm, not threat, then turned her head toward the northern ridgeline, the wild expanse where few dared to go. She let out a deep, resonant sound, not a growl but a low moan that rolled through the valley like thunder. The cubs responded instantly, moving beside her. The woman realized what it meant. They were leaving. She wanted to reach out to say something, but her voice caught in her throat. The bear began to walk, slow and deliberate, toward the shadowed trail that led deeper into the wilderness. The cubs followed, their small bodies brushing against her legs. At the edge of the grove, the mother bear stopped once more and looked back. One last glance, deep and unreadable. It wasn't farewell, it was a warning. A quiet, enduring promise that this grove, this fragile place of sweetness and survival, would not belong to those who took without giving. When the bears disappeared into the mist, the woman knelt beside the honeycomb they'd left. She touched it gently, it was still warm, alive. She placed it in a jar and whispered, "I'll keep it safe." That evening the hunters returned. She saw them from the ridge, rifles ready, stomping through mud. But they found nothing, no paw prints, no bears, only the hum of bees and the stillness of a grove that looked untouched. They cursed under their breath and left before sunset. As the woman watched them go, relief flooded through her, but also grief. The grove felt emptier now, though safer. The bees danced among the blossoms as if the bears had never been there, yet every flower seemed to hold their memory. And in that moment, the woman understood the lesson the forest had been teaching her all along, that some bonds are made not through words or touch, but through shared silence, through respect. Still, deep in her heart, she knew the story wasn't over. The wilderness remembers those who protect it. And one day, when the forest needed its guardian again, the mother bear would return. Days turned into weeks, and the forest slowly fell into the rhythm of late autumn. The air grew sharper, the trees shed their golden coats, and frost began to cling to the grass each morning. The woman's cabin, perched on the ridge above the river, was quieter now. But inside her heart, a new kind of stillness had taken root, not the loneliness of isolation, but the peace of knowing she had done something right. Every morning she walked down to the honey grove. It had changed since the bears left. The once disturbed earth was firm again, the bees thriving in numbers she hadn't seen before. She tended the wildflowers that lined the clearing and placed small stones around the grove's edge, a simple boundary not to keep anyone out, but to remind herself that this place wasn't hers alone. She often brought the jar of honey the bears had left her. She'd sealed it carefully, yet sometimes she opened it just to smell the faint sweetness within, raw, earthy, untouched by human hands. It reminded her of that last morning, of the mother bear's steady gaze and the cub's small shapes fading into the mist. At times she wondered where they were now. Were they safe? Had they found another place rich with bees and shelter? Sometimes in the quietest hours before dawn, she thought she heard faint movement beyond the river, a distant crack of twigs, a low rustle among the pines. And though she never saw them again, she liked to believe they still watched from afar. Then one morning as the first snow began to fall, she noticed something strange by the grove's edge. In the soft white dusting lay a trail of paw prints, not many, just a few. They led from the treeline to the old rocks where the honey had once pooled. The prints were large, familiar. Her breath caught as she knelt beside them, running her fingers gently over the fresh impressions. "Is it you?" she whispered. No shape moved among the trees, but she felt it again, that watchful presence, patient and aware. The forest around her held its breath. She smiled, tears mixing with the cold air. It wasn't the first snowfall she'd seen, but it felt like the beginning of something. Not an ending, not even a goodbye, but a promise renewed. She began leaving small offerings in the grove every few weeks, apples, berries, sometimes a jar of honey she'd bought from the nearby town. Never too close to the center, never too obvious. It wasn't about feeding or taming, it was about remembering, honoring. Winter came in full, covering the valley in deep silence. The hunters never returned after that last futile trip. Maybe they'd decided there was nothing left to find. Maybe, deep down, the forest itself had discouraged them. Months later, when spring returned, the woman noticed something extraordinary. New hives, several of them, had appeared high in the old trees around the grove. She hadn't seen bees build that high before. Their hum filled the air again, stronger and louder than ever. And right beneath one of those trees, she found something that made her sit down on the moss and laugh through tears. A paw-sized claw mark on the bark, faint but unmistakable. The bears had come back, not to stay but to visit. To make sure the grove still thrived. That night, sitting by her cabin fire, she finally spoke aloud the thoughts that had been living in her chest for months. "You taught me more than any person ever did," she said softly to the dark beyond the window. "That the wild doesn't need saving. It just needs respect. And love." Outside, the forest listened. The wind carried her words down through the trees, across the river, and into the honey grove. The moonlight spilled silver over the clearing, and somewhere, unseen, a bear's deep breath echoed softly before fading into the night. The camera panned slowly from her cabin window to the glowing grove below, bees moving in golden light, wildflowers swaying, the faint impression of paw prints leading into the forest's endless heart. Her story became one the valley would quietly tell, of the woman who protected the honey grove, and the bears who, in return, protected her world. And as she closed her eyes, listening to the soft hum of bees carried by the wind, one final thought settled in her mind, a truth simple yet eternal. When humans and the wild choose to listen instead of conquer, even silence can sound like trust.